the Andes Mountains of central Chile. At an elevation of 2,200 meters, this part of the Andes is not high by mountaineering standards, but it's high enough for other purposes. Perched on one of the peaks are the telescopes of the Las Campanas Observatory. This is the home of Canada's most distant telescope. Astronomer Bob Hill, a University of Toronto graduate student, is relaxing before the evening's work begins. Two other Canadian astronomers, Barry Madore and his wife Wendy Freedman, are here at Las Campanas with their 6-month-old daughter Rachel. They are halfway through a 15-night observing run. Rachel is one of the most traveled infants in the world. She's already logged 30,000 kilometers on trips to telescopes around the globe. South America may seem a long way to journey just to look at the stars, but this is one of the best locations in the world for astronomy, thanks to the Atacama Desert. The clear desert sky provides an unclouded view of the heavens for over 300 nights a year. The Atacama Desert is the driest place on the face of the earth. For most of the year, the desert is a brown, parched wasteland devoid of life. Now and then these conditions do change, but only briefly. In the winter, dark clouds sometimes form, cutting off the telescope's view. Heavy rains transform the landscape around the observatory into a garden. Soon enough, the clouds burn away and the air regains its remarkable clarity. Moisture barriers on either side of the Atacama keep this area an astronomer's paradise. Less than 100 kilometers from the observatory lies the frigid Humboldt Current of the Pacific Ocean, one of the richest ocean areas in the world and home to millions of seabirds. The warm clouds moving in off the ocean are robbed of their moisture by the colder air above the Humboldt Current. By the time the air reaches the observatory, it is almost completely dry. On the other side of the desert, the Andes Mountains block any moisture from reaching the observatory from the east. This evening's weather at Las Campanas is predictably clear. As the rest of Chile begins to wind down for the day, the astronomers are gearing up for another night of observing. Bob Hill is working with a Canadian telescope tonight. Las Campanas is run by the Carnegie Institution of Washington, but this telescope is the responsibility of its Canadian owners, the University of Toronto. The 24-inch is one of the smallest telescopes on the mountain, but it has been upgraded with a state-of-the-art device called a CCD. It works like a video camera, producing a high-quality image of stars. Liquid nitrogen keeps it cooled to a chilly minus 120 degrees Celsius. Tonight, Bob is using colored filters to look at different wavelengths of light emitted by his target stars. The data is stored instantly by computer, and he will analyze it later at his Toronto lab. After a final check, Bob is ready to take his first image of the evening. Over at the 100-inch, Wendy is making last-minute adjustments. This is one of the largest windows on the southern sky. Tonight, Barry and Wendy will be looking at stars that no one on Earth has ever seen before. Barry is doing double duty. He'll divide his time between the 100-inch and helping Bob over at the 24-inch. Rachel is here too, with her babysitter. Sometime in the wee observing hours, she'll fall asleep to the sound of astronomy in action. Unlike the Canadian telescope, the 100-inch is operated from a control room that's separate from the telescope itself. Angel, the telescope operator, will rotate the big scope from target to target throughout the night. In this part of the world, there's no lack of targets. It's perhaps the most glorious sky anywhere. It makes you understand why Barry and Wendy devote their lives to studying the sky.
It's immensely exciting to be part of the universe and discover new things and see things for the first time. It's such a wonderful outlet for imagination. It really is as close to philosophy, I guess, as you can get, while still being in touch with the real world.
You come down, the skies are clear, you observe an object maybe that nobody's ever seen before, or study an aspect that nobody's ever studied before. You watch the pictures come on the TV screen, you see the spectrum come out for the first time. I find it extremely exciting.
The excitement of night-to-night observing is one thing, but occasionally an astronomer makes a really big discovery. That's what happened to Winnipeg-born astronomer Ian Shelton. Ian spent 4 years at Las Campanas, in charge of the 24-inch telescope. In his free time, he took pictures of the night sky. On February 24th, 1987, he discovered the biggest astronomical event of the last 4 centuries.
The night itself wasn't too bad. It was a bit cool and very windy. You're used to 30, 40 mile an hour winds on the mountaintop. Being free on my evenings at this particular stretch of my work, I went over the 10-inch astrograph, that's the Carnegie's 10-inch astrograph, and prepared that for the night. And I had been using this since Comet Halley the year before, and it's a very, very nice machine, but you have to sort of spend a lot of time with it. It's a very manual machine. It means you climb up on the roof and you push the roof open. The telescope does track with the stars, but it uses a clockwork, so you have to wind up the telescope every 30 minutes to keep it tracking.
Ian was testing the astrograph, so he put in a photographic plate and pointed it at the large Magellanic Cloud, a small satellite galaxy orbiting our own Milky Way. He finished the first exposure and got ready to do the next.
The second plate went a lot smoother because I had got the coat on and I got a cup of coffee to prop me up for the rest of the night. But unfortunately, about 1 hour into the exposure, something else intervened. The very strong wind picked up the roof on the 10-inch building and closed it on me. And that had never happened before, and as a matter of fact, I was so dumbfounded about it because the roof is very big and very heavy. I didn't think it was physically possible for the wind to do that. So when it did it, it knocked the telescope horizontal, which effectively terminated the exposure, and then it slammed shut.
Ian was pretty tired by this point, but the night's work wasn't over yet. After developing the plates in his darkroom, Ian wanted to see how they turned out.
The first thing you do is when you put on the light tablet, you very critically examine all the star images on the plate. And I just do this as a matter of course because it makes me feel better when I go to bed if everything works out well. And within a few moments of looking at the plate, I discovered an extra star on the plate.
This was no easy feat, with so many stars in the Las Campanas sky, but Ian's experience allowed him to see a small change in the pattern of starlight on his plates. Ian had just discovered a massive exploding star called a supernova.
When you stand outside and you look at this other galaxy, and you can see that it's another galaxy, and you see this bright object embedded in it, you immediately realize that it's made up of a myriad of very faint stars, and there's only one star that you can see with your own eye, and is blazing away. It's as bright as other stars in our own galaxy. You immediately know that this has got to be something spectacular.
Ian's discovery electrified the astronomical community. This was the first time the beginning of a supernova had ever been witnessed. Only the largest stars in the universe end their days in such a spectacular fashion. The death of our sun will be much less dramatic. It's too small to provide the energy for a supernova. In just 1 second, a supernova releases 100 times more energy than our sun will release in its entire 10 billion year lifetime. Telescopes around the world spot dozens of supernovas each year, but they've all been too far away to provide much detailed information. This supernova was in one of the closest galaxies to our own, just 170,000 light years away. The last one this close occurred in 1604, before the invention of the telescope. Scientists have waited ever since to test the theories they've developed to explain supernovas. Ian Shelton's discovery was one of the biggest things that had ever happened to a Canadian astronomer. But the fact that a Canadian discovered this event is not surprising. Canada has a long tradition of astronomy. It began in the 18th century in Louisbourg on Cape Breton Island, the first stop for ships coming to the New World. The Marquis de Chabert, a French nobleman, was one of the earliest astronomers to set foot on Canadian soil. He came from France in 1750 and spent a year in scientific pursuit. He used his knowledge of the stars to draw up better navigational charts for the waters around New France. The Marquis was also interested in the less functional aspects of astronomy. Using what were then the best telescopes in Canada, he made observations of the moon and stars until the Louisbourg fog drove him back to France. Early interest in astronomy generally had a very practical motive. Mariners and explorers knew the heavens well. With the aid of a sextant, they used the stars as a map to navigate by, but the accuracy depended on knowing the time. Ships carried clocks called chronometers, which were set in Europe before they left. The problem was that the chronometers often became inaccurate after a few months at sea. To help correct the situation, navigators needed locations in Canada where time could be fixed reliably. In the early 1800s, timekeeping observatories were built at major ports like Quebec City and Halifax. A daily ritual at these ports was the firing of the noon gun, a signal that ships in the harbor used to reset their chronometers.
Signal gun, ready! Shot! One, fire!
At the turn of this century, the Canadian government became more involved in astronomy. The Dominion Observatory in Ottawa was set up to keep time, synchronizing the clocks in the nation's capital. observatory also installed a 15-inch telescope, one of the largest of its time in North America. Now it was possible to do top-notch research on Canadian soil, but by 1910 the potential of the Ottawa equipment was pretty much exhausted. Astronomers began lobbying for a bigger telescope to be built in the best possible location in Canada. The result was the Dominion Astrophysical Observatory in Victoria, BC. When the project opened in 1918, it boasted a 72-inch telescope, the largest in the entire world. This was a big step for Canadian science. The country was just coming into its own as a nation, and the Victoria Telescope was one of the expressions of this new feeling of pride. Astronomy has always attracted a special kind of person. While other people slept, the astronomer traveled up the mountain to spend the night alone in the dark. The telescope mirrors had to be kept at the same temperature as the outside air to avoid distortion, so the domes were unheated. Winter observing could be a nightmare, but even in summer, the astronomer was often shivering with cold by the time the night was over. There weren't many jobs in the field, and they generally didn't pay well. People pursued this science for the most part because of their fascination with the stars. The Victoria telescope could explore faint celestial objects that were invisible to smaller telescopes. In 1935, even fainter objects became observable from a new telescope in Ontario.
Under construction for 3 years, the Dunlap Memorial Observatory at Richmond Hill is nearing completion. The steel dome, 61 feet in diameter, will house the giant telescope, second in size only to the one on Mount Wilson, California. The tube will hold the great mirror, accurate to 1/1,000,000 of an inch. Canada's new telescope will have about 100,000 eye power, and will make the moon appear to be only about 50 miles distant. In this end will be placed the 74-inch mirror. Professor C.A. Chant tells about the gift.
The whole telescope weighs over 56 tons. The reason for having such a great telescope as this is because the greater the area of the mirror, the farther into space one can peer. And in that way, we expect to extend our researches much farther than we have ever been able to do so before.
The Dunlap Observatory attracted some excellent scientists, including Dr. Helen Hogg. One of the first female astronomers hired in Canada, she spent over 60 years in scientific pursuit.
To me, it's important to know as much as possible about the universe we're living in. I just can't see being interested only in this tiny Earth. To me, it's like living in a cellar if you just concentrate on this one Earth and not look out and see what's beyond.
A fascination with space is not restricted to professionals like Dr. Hogg. Astronomy is one of the few fields of science today where amateurs still play a key role. They're the watchmen of the night skies, keeping a cold vigil out under the stars. In the early days, telescopes were expensive and there were few to be had. Amateur stargazing was pretty much a hobby for the wealthy. Today, things have changed dramatically. Good quality equipment is widely available, though few amateurs have as complex a setup as Jerry Burke of Sudbury. In an old satellite tracking dome, Jerry photographs the sky with an impressive array of gear.
The eyes get very dark at that, and details just pop right out.
Jerry belongs to the Sudbury Astronomy Club, an enthusiastic group of 40 stargazers.
Looks like it will be the beehive. Gerhard, did you find the beehive?
Amateurs regularly scan the skies and often report the first sightings of comets, novas, and their brighter relatives, supernovas. They use a variety of devices, some of them homemade. Many go so far as to grind their own lenses and mirrors.
Okay.
Yo! Because our eyes are dark.
If anything, astronomy is more the domain of amateurs than professionals. There are several thousand amateur astronomers active in Canada today, and less than 250 professionals.
Gorgeous.
That's a good telescope.
Because usually you see persons
Sparkling diamonds,
come up and then Percy.
Yeah, beautiful.
Some areas of astronomy are way beyond the scope of amateurs. Radio telescopes, like this one at the Algonquin Observatory in Ontario, detect invisible radio waves emitted by objects as old as the universe itself. Since they don't measure visible light, they aren't dependent on darkness and can monitor the sky 24 hours a day. After 28 years of operation, the Algonquin Observatory was closed in 1987. Increasingly, our astronomers are moving off Canadian soil to do their research. The telescopes at Richmond Hill and Victoria are still in use, but the encroaching lights of the surrounding cities have greatly reduced their effectiveness. Canada is now building its new telescopes in the best observing locations in the world. In the northern hemisphere, Hawaii is the prime spot. Mauna Kea, a 4,000-meter dormant volcano, rises above the clouds. Canada has collaborated with France and Hawaii to put a large telescope on its summit. In Chile, the sun is just beginning to rise on the best place for astronomy in the southern hemisphere. There are 3 major observatories here and over 20 telescopes in operation, including the ones at Las Campanas. In the big dome, the 100-inch has taken its last image, and Wendy is reviewing the night's results. It will take her months to analyze the data she's gathered here. In the Canadian dome, Bob and Barry are putting the finishing touches to an equally long night's work. Their main target has been the supernova, discovered by Ian Shelton 6 months earlier. The exploding star is much dimmer now, but it's still receiving lots of attention. Already, it has changed the way astronomers view the universe. They're still evaluating data from the event, but one thing is certain: astronomy will never be the same again. The supernova has changed Ian Shelton's life as well. He became, like his discovery, a superstar, featured on magazine covers and TV shows around the world. He's left the mountain now, but his experiences in Chile will remain with him forever.
Lying on your back, looking straight up on a dark Chilean night as the galactic center goes over you, the heavens become a real entity. Every night there's going to be something happening out there. It just happens very slowly generally, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it really goes off with a bang, and everything unveils itself within minutes.
The revelations from Ian's discovery will continue for centuries as astronomers follow the evolution of a dying star to see what becomes of it. In the grand scale of the universe, the supernova is just a flash in cosmic time, but it's a flash that has fired the imagination of all who watch the heavens from their mountaintops here on Earth.